Hey friends, welcome to the Arable Leader Podcast, where we talk about leading from a deeper place, leading from a character place, leading from your soul. And we use the qualities true, brave, kind, and curious to describe the character that changes people, that changes teams, and that changes culture. I am super excited today to have you get two for the price of one today. It's not just one leader who inspires me, it's two, and they happen to be married. So welcome to the Dubbeldams, to Steve and to Sarah, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
This is the Arable Leader Podcast. I'm Karl Martin, and we're exploring true, brave, kind, curious leadership, leading from your soul. I try to work out how to describe you to the people that are listening. I'm going to go serial entrepreneurs, adventurers, fun people. The best looking couple in the Western world is where I'm going to go. So if you're watching this, you can decide. But I think that's the case. So here's the question I want to ask: where did all that come from? Usually there are people in our life who inspire us to be the kind of people that we are, or that we rail against. So Steve, Sarah, whoever wants to go first, where did you come from? What's the inspiration for how you show up in the world?
I feel I grew up in Canada in a family of essentially entrepreneurs and pioneers. So grandparents on both sides immigrated from the Netherlands to Canada. And especially my grandfather on my dad's side, he was just a dreamer, an inventor, a doer, and he just led this big life of adventure. You know, they hand built a trimaran, a 60-foot trimaran sailing boat, and took all the kids out of school and sailed it from Toronto all the way down to Florida and back. Like that was the norm, right? Growing up, we'd be picking them up from the airport. It feels like, every other month, and they, had shipped their Volkswagen to Romania and just drove around Romania, staying with local farmers for a month. So like those were the stories that I grew up hearing, right? Like there's a pioneer spirit, a DIY spirit, don't let money get in the way of creativity. And so that was the world that I grew up in, mixed with entrepreneurial, endeavors. So my grandfather owned his own business. My dad started his own family business alongside my uncle. So I grew up in that environment of, we don't bring the cars into the repair shop. We do it ourselves. We don't have someone else build our house. My dad built it himself. So it's like very deeply ingrained, down to very few things that other people do for us as a family. So that was pretty deep to it. That was my normal. So that's why I think at 20, it started my first business and have always worked for myself since then. That's
amazing. That just gets into you, doesn't it? It becomes part of your DNA. Sarah, is it same for you? I imagine maybe not exactly the same, maybe a bit different.
Not exactly the same, but both my parents are really creative. My dad has always been an entrepreneur ever since he was really young. He's a realtor and a developer, and my mom was an interior designer when I was growing up. So my dad is very optimistic. He was always like, you can do whatever you want to do. You can change the world. You can, build things. You can be different. He was just always very, very encouraging and never really put me in a box, especially as a woman. Like, you need to do this, or you should be on this pathway, but was really advocating for just being myself and using my strengths in the world. So I think that I saw that growing up, someone who was always having ideas and pitching ideas and getting investors and building things and trying to get people on board with the things he was doing and his vision. And so saw that modeled for me. And then I also had a couple of mentors in high school and a couple of teachers that were really instrumental in my life, just helping me think bigger about who I wanted to be, how I wanted to show up in the world. Were there any problems I wanted to solve, and culture and things like that. So I would point it back to a few intentional people for sure.
Yeah. It's amazing how, I think it's Jim Rohn who said that we are the sum of the 5 people closest to us in life. And I kind of buy into that. I kind of buy into that it's bigger than that, that actually we're the sum of all the people that we allow to influence our lives. And it's amazing the stories that I hear of people who've gone on to do significant things in the world, who had people around them who intentionally helped them think through these things in certain ways. Knowing about it and having it in you is one thing. Doing it is doing it, right? And you, both of you in different ways, have done it. You've had a go, and you've had a number of iterations of having a go. And Sarah, let's start with you. You where you've got to right now. You have Darling. I'm sure many people who are listening to this will know what Darling is. But for those who don't, it's a community. It has been a clothing brand, probably is still a clothing brand. You've had magazines and publications. What is Darling, and what's more than just what is Darling? What's the thought behind Darling?
So I started Darling when I was 22 years old. Actually had the idea for it, was sitting at a coffee shop with a best friend of mine talking about how women's media was really terrible, really discouraging, unattainable, retouched, fake, and just not an encouragement to women. And so we had the idea to start our own magazine, the first magazine to not Photoshop women and to have real advice for women in different stages of their life and actual real issues they were going through. So we launched the brand on Kickstarter, actually, and grew it as a quarterly print magazine. And so over the years, it's grown into more of a lifestyle brand. We've done experiences, dinners with conversation around the things Darling talks about. We did launch a clothing line a year and a half ago, which we're still pursuing. So we really do content, product, and events all centered around women knowing their beauty, their worth, and their purpose. And then as a result of that, having it really change their mindset and living with joy and passion and peace. That's what we want as a result of people experiencing our brand, is just to have a mindset shift of being able to really reclaim what's already inside of them, because the world and culture and social media steals a lot from women. So we're always trying to give that back to them pretty much every day through all our communication and everything we do.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. Let's put a pin in the social media conversation and turn across to Steve. Steve, Wilderness. I actually was just coaching a couple of guys this 2 days ago who told me they were coming this weekend on a wilderness trip. And which is cool, because I said, I know that guy. Felt me, I was so proud. And so tell me about Wilderness. What's the point of Wilderness? Is it just boys with big toys driving around, or is there anything more to it than that?
Sure. Yeah. So I started Wilderness Collective 12 years ago now. And the big idea was that adventure kind of exposes some chinks in the armor for people, right? So when you're out on a real adventure where, you don't know where you're going, you don't have all the plan put together, or there's some uncertainty, and you're there with people that you care about.
Yeah.
The likelihood for a meaningful, truly meaningful, capital M, personal experiences or relationally transformative experiences just goes through the roof, right? You can remember conversations that you had around a campfire at 8,000 feet on the ridge of a mountain so much more than you remember having a coffee with a buddy even a month ago. So there's something about exploring natural spaces with people you care about in an environment of adventure where it just galvanizes learnings, insights, so people are just more open. So I've built a business around baiting people with adventure, right? The dirt bike, the four-wheeler, that's the bait. And people sign up for our trips for all kinds of reasons. And our job is, by the end of the trip, to get them to realize why they're there, why they really signed up for it. I thought it looked fun to ride a motorcycle to Yosemite. Yeah, it is fun. But there's something bigger in their life where they were thirsty for this experience, to be reminded what it's like to be truly alive, to have an opportunity to transform themselves, right? So we set the table. Our job is to create context. Our job is not to force transformation, but we set the table. We set people free. We create a distraction-free environment for them. And then the likelihood that they're going to walk away having a few more puzzle pieces of their life figured out, straightened out, or found is huge. Is very high. So we're, it's not adventure for adventure's sake, right? It's adventure with the real purpose of providing a space for people to disconnect, to reconnect to what matters.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really not dissimilar to what I do. You know, people invite Arable in because they got a problem they need fixed, because they want to sort something, and we come and say, yeah, we can help with that, but here is the conversation we really want to have.
Yeah. Do people break their bones a lot when you work with them?
No, I think some of them want to break each other's bones.
Okay. So we're a little bit different what we do.
Yeah. Well, totally different. But if it helps my brand to align myself with someone like you, Steve.
You're like adventure adjacent, risk adjacent.
Yeah, risk adjacent. That's exactly the phrase. Okay, let's push into this a little bit, because of the 4 qualities that we talk about, I could have picked any one of them for the two of you, because they are connected significantly. True is all about integrity and honesty and authenticity and showing up and knowing yourself. Brave is about courage and purpose and focus, and kind is about connectedness and relationality and empathy and an ability to read a room. Curious is the one that I wanted to land on with you. And for both of you, actually, I wanted to call this the Wonder Files. How do we rediscover wonder in our world today, in a world which can become very grey, vanilla? How do we rediscover that kind of curiosity? Why does this exist? Every day's a school day. Every process, every experience that remains unprocessed stays unlearned. How do we discover that? And I think you both carry that in different ways. So I want to tease that out a little bit. How do you both individually create margin to pause and go, I wonder whether, is it possible? What could it look like if? Talk to me about that.
I think for me, I've been trying in general to create more quiet and space in my life, like really thinking about not just my work and what I'm constantly building, because I think in an entrepreneurial culture, or if you go to an event with a bunch of entrepreneurs, it's all about, name dropping and what I'm building and what I'm doing, and like bigger and more and more and more. But Steve and I have a lot of conversations about how it's not always about more. It's about the quality of your life. And if you have space, if you have margin, if you have breathing room for people, so that you have the capacity within yourself to give to other people and to be reciprocal to your friendships and to show up for people. And you're not like, I'm just so busy. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. Because if you pack your life so tight with things, it's really, really hard to have space to dream or to think or to be at rest. And so we've really been trying to create that margin by being off our phones when we're with our kids, to go camping, to disconnect very regularly from just the digital world and the amount of communication that goes on in our world, to think like, what am I actually doing? Like, who's in my life? Who's around me? Am I being intentional with them? And it just makes you feel more of that wonder and beauty and joy of life, and helps you realign to like what's important and what matters. So we're constantly having that idea of, or thinking about life as like in moments and days and months and years. Like the moments all add up. So like, are they just flying by, or are you actually able to connect in them and experience your life? Or is your life just like happening to you? So I don't know if that's too abstract, but that's
I love that. And let me push it a bit further with Steve. Steve, I follow you on, I can't remember, his Instagram probably. And, I see you in Mexico. I see you in Mongolia. I see Steve in Portugal. I see the two of you in France. And I think, I want this guy's life. And then I wonder whether I do. But how do you find time to work on your business, not just in your business? So you're thinking through what's coming down the track at me. What's the point of wilderness? Where are we heading? How can we make this thing everything that it could be?
Part of the answer is practical. Part of it is a bit more like, kind of conceptual. So the practical bit is, I'm now standing on the other side of, 12 years of hard work to build an incredible team around me, right? Who is executing the day-to-day largely of the business, right? So they're kind of working in the business. I've got a fantastic GM who really does a great job of freeing me up to think about the business, right? To work on the business. So that is a practical shift that was a huge unlock for me, probably at about the 10-year mark. So it took a long time, and that, I'm reaping the benefits of that. Now, the one thing is like, I need to use that time wisely, so I'm freed up and I can kind of waste that time by like, getting, kind of rabbit holing on little things that are interesting to me, or I can actually, create some productive work from that. But on a more conceptual, like me and my life, and what helps me get that, clear-headed space where you can just kind of let your thoughts roll around. You think, why am I doing this? Why am I still doing this? A bit of the more the 30,000 foot view. I aspire to, be like, I meditate every morning for an hour in a cave that I've built in my backyard, but I'm not there.
Sounds like a great idea. Do that.
Yeah, I've got a 4-year-old, I've got an 8-year-old, and they're savages. So that doesn't happen. So where it happens for me, and I essentially built an entire business around this, is it happens for me in the flow state of exertion and activities. So if you're riding a motorcycle for 4 days straight, 100 miles a day through the desert, you don't really have the privilege anymore of thinking about the tasks that you have in life. You're thinking rock, tree, cactus, rock, cactus, tree, and so it kind of washes your mind clean because you're in a prolonged flow state.
Yeah.
And so my whole business is ripping people out of their busy day-to-day lives, giving them a chance to disconnect from that. We take their phones away, literally lock them in a box, so we can give them the gift of being in this other state of awareness, which is kind of this flow state, right? And so I find that for me, my deepest thinking happens when I'm out in the wild, exploring somewhere I've never been before, which kind of turns on the learner brain. You're like, you're more heightened. It's not like the same drive you do home every single day. You're like, I don't know where I am, and I'm doing an activity that is a flow state. That can be walking, it can be hiking, cycling, like anything essentially, like kinesthetic. Usually can put you in that space. So, and I think it's heightened when you're going 90 miles an hour on a dirt bike.
So guys, if you're listening, don't miss this. That was brilliant. And why that's so important is that that you come up with your best ideas and your best thoughts when you're in the shower, or when you're on a run, or when you're doing something that it's the law of indirect effort. You're not actually thinking about the thing, you're thinking about everything else, because your brain goes into that autobiographical state where it just remembers things that it already knows. And that's brilliant. So find those spaces. But the other thing that's vitally important is that you find ways to capture that stuff. Because most of the time I have my best thoughts when I'm running or I'm in the shower, and then I forget and I haven't got a pencil or a pen on my phone or whatever else. So the practice of something like journaling, to be able to process the experience and say, what was that? How do I capture it? Is vitally important. And now back to the podcast. So here's the conversation that I would like to push into a little bit, guys. As entrepreneurs and as creatives, both of you creatives in different ways, part of that process is success and failure, or a significant part of that process is failure. You have a go at something. Your first iteration is usually wrong. Your second iteration might be half right, and then you're moving. How do you guys think about failure? And maybe even some very granular and practical things that you do to pick yourself up again and keep going, even though the last thing perhaps didn't work the way you wanted it to work.
Yeah, I think over the years we've tried so many different things with Darling because we are a lifestyle brand. Like, for example, print is no longer a viable business, so we're into more digital content and going to launch a podcast and different things, but that's like what we started with. So it's very hard to not think I'm a total failure. Like, my first business, or everything that this thing is built upon and its medium, isn't happening anymore.
Yeah.
But what I always think about, it's been a real process for me, is that failure actually happens to every single business owner. And I think that there's a lot out there where you don't see that. Like I was saying at those gatherings where people are talking about their best moments, there's not a lot of that. There's a few podcasts where you hear a few of those moments, and I love those, but it actually does happen to every single business. If you look at the history of them or their first iteration of something, or a brand like Netflix and how they started and what they are now. So I try to remember that like everybody experiences this, and that business, Steve always tells me this, that business is just problem solving. Like you need to just think about it every day, like that there are going to be things that come up. There's going to be things that go wrong all day long, every single day. And if you just accept that that's going to happen, it's not failure every single day. It's like actually the nature of what business is failing, trying, reiterating, solving problems. And it's not just a walk in the park, like ever. That's just, so if you can accept that and then just look at those things positively, like, oh, here's another thing that I'm having to deal with, or that didn't work. Let's see how we can reiterate that, and trying not to have it be really tragic every time something happens, and kind of seeing the bigger picture of where you're headed and what you're doing. And also what helps me is just going back to my why and thinking about the people that I'm doing my company for. How is it actually impacting them and changing them? And that it's not all about me and how I feel with my success. It's about how am I really focusing on what I'm doing to best serve people with our mission. So I've done a lot of work on honing that as like a one-liner, an umbrella over everything I do, so that every time I do something, I can ladder back up to it and I can remember it, and it kind of grounds me on, oh, this is why we're doing that. So it doesn't matter that this thing failed. We're still doing this in this different way, and trying to maintain that optimism is very hard as an entrepreneur. So you have to have tough skin, and you have to have a big picture mentality in order to make it and keep going.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And part of it is recognizing that failure is the event, not you. And that's really hard, because it's very easy to take it personally and say, oh, I screwed up or whatever. But the other part for me is, I imagine, Sarah, that actually you living your failures or your lacks of success out loud is as valuable to people that are listening to you as your quote unquote successes, because they all know their failures as well. They all know they messed up. They all know that life was difficult for them. And so the sanitized version that we have of our lives, this idealized ego that we present to the world, doesn't actually help a lot of people. It's the reality of the ups and downs and the ins and the outs of our lives that's super helpful. Steve, what you got anything you want to add to that? You must have. I mean, I know you crashed a lot, and broken some bones. The last time I spoke to you, you could hardly walk, and you were still refusing to go to the doctor, I imagine. So
he doesn't go to the doctor. That's another thing.
I thought about it.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, no, I'm a professional at failure. I started my first business, I think at 20. So I think wilderness now is probably my 8th serious venture. And I remember with my first business reading these business books, and they're like, yeah, it'll take probably at least, it could take up to 10 businesses for you to like finally break through as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, you don't believe it. Yeah.
It sucks for you guys, but it won't be that for me. And so, the first failure was so important, because that's when I learned to separate who I am from what I do, right? So what I did failed, and I was still me. I still had the relationships around me, and I still had that drive to pick myself up and try again. And I think that's really the mark of an entrepreneur, is if you can rise out of the ashes again and again and again with optimism. I've heard this definition of entrepreneurs that says you need to be completely honest about the facts and fearlessly optimistic in spite of them. Right. So you've got this duality. So you're like, this is really bad, what we're dealing with right now. We owe $500,000 and we laid off 16 people in one meeting. That's pretty bad. Yeah. However, I've got enough faith and enough belief in what we're doing that we can try again. Right. And so I think that's a mark of it. And not everyone is wired that way, for sure, and shouldn't try to be. If they're not, that's okay. So for me, I have just early on in my career, I just equated failure equals education.
That's good.
I didn't go to university. Well, I made it 1 year and I was like, this is not for me. But like all my early failures was like, I was getting an MBA that other people were paying for, investors were paying for, And so it was really, you just have to reframe failure as education. And if that's your mindset, well, then the more you fail, the more you'll learn. And then your failure rate is going to go down more and more. And then what you start to do, ideally, you move from failing at ventures to failing at ideas within your venture, right? So I've had now Wilderness for 12 years. It's the longest I've run a business I've started. Yet there's been lots of failures within the container of Wilderness that were, educational moments for me. I think because of the previous venture failures, I'm still able to have the company intact.
Yeah. I think it's Amy Edmondson who talks about 2 or 3 different kinds of failure, which I might categorize as 2 kinds of failure. There's stupid failure. You fail doing the same thing again and again and again and think you're going to get different results. That's dumb failure. And then there's educated failure or forward-thinking failure or successful failure, which is you're having a go. You're being positive. You're trying something out, and I think that's what you're describing. That I love the positive, make aggressive mistakes, not passive ones, front forward kind of thinking that you guys both have, and we're going to champion you to keep having, if we have any impact at all on you. But here's the question I want to ask as we come. This is too brief. We need to talk more. But curiosity. What are you guys thinking about right now? What are you dreaming right now? What are you reading that's maybe even scaring you right now? What's the future look like for you, for Darling, for Wilderness? What are you speculating on?
I've been thinking a lot about just doing few things really well versus lots of things. So like potency, and really slowing down and trying to make like 1 or 2 things I do very, very excellent, and instead of trying to do a wider array of things and what that means, because sometimes you want to go fast or you want things to happen in an instant, but really good lasting things always take time. And I've just been thinking about, what does that mean for my life in this stage? Like, what does culture need right now to hear from Darling or from me? Because I essentially am Darling's voice, so I've been really thinking about that. Like, what does it mean to really focus your life on something very specific to your gifting and what you have to give to the world? So that's just been involved a lot of dreaming about, who am I actually? What do I have to give? Like, it's just a lot of thinking around that. And I'm not the best reader. I have a hard time focusing. So I'm currently not reading much. I don't have a lot of bandwidth with the time I spend with my kids. So there's not a lot of reading going on, but there is a lot of journaling and daydreaming going on with me.
Okay, well, let's just push a little bit further into that, if it's okay. What's maybe just one little hint you can give us to something you're playing around in your mind as being the thing, or the thing that might be most potent? Tell us maybe some more detail around what you're thinking.
Well, I've really been dreaming a lot about starting a podcast. And I think it's interesting when you do have a brand that has a pretty big platform, like Darling. A lot of times I've been able, although I'm the founder, I've been able to hide behind the brand Darling or the name Darling, but actually like coming out from around it and being myself, my voice on a podcast, giving wisdom to women. And what would those things be is really what I've been dreaming about, and thinking about that. What other voices do I bring into that in just a very practical way, bringing wisdom to women about things that I'm seeing that myself and my friends are actually going through, like a very stripped down advice. Like if you were talking to your favorite mentor or your grandma or someone that you just have to go to for advice, I want to make it really potent and really short and really impactful for people. So I've been dreaming about what that's going to be, but it hasn't started yet. So, but it's
fantastic. Find your voice, Sarah. That's amazing. I think you have some stuff the world needs to hear. Steve, you found your voice. And so tell us what you read a little bit, you watch things, you read culture. What are you thinking about, and what are you dreaming about? And what do you think is coming down the track for you at Wilderness?
Sure. Yeah, I think that since becoming a father and being raised by a fantastic father, like the idea of fatherhood has always been big for me. And we get a chance to, share space with lots of dads on the trips that we host, And so I've been leaning more and more into that, just knowing that there's a real need for, fathers to feel encouraged and equipped, for this huge fatherless generation to feel like they've got support, and for kids to feel like they've got people they can lean on, strong men in their lives. And so, starting to do a little bit of charitable work in that space, kind of giving opportunity for dads and their kids to come on our trip experiences and kind of have this, a real pinnacle mile marker experience in their life. But then also what I'm working on now is, and there's some folks doing great work on this, but I think that I need to show up to the conversation too, is the idea of rites of passage, right? So there are rites of passage in modern North America, like they're, kind of the cultural rites of passage are really nothing that you'd want to be proud of. And so I'm wanting to push more and more into developing some products that can act as a launch pad for, rites of passage experiences for young boys and young people, and kind of wrapping that around our primary product offering, which is this adventure experience. But how can we create an adventure that actually helps a dad who wants to offer an experience like this to his son, but doesn't know how to do it? How can we come alongside and create a better likelihood for that to happen? And yeah, I've got some friends, who are doing great work on, academic and, kind of a spiritual formation front around that. But I think that we offer such a tactile, physical experience that blending those two things together, I think is just really needed. So I'm wanting to step more into that space. And yeah, I think for the future of what I'm doing is to just be focused on slow geometric growth instead of exponential growth, growth at all costs. I'm just not interested in the hockey stick, the Silicon Valley, just grow at all costs thing. And I think especially now having two young boys, you start thinking about, okay, I'd want to build a business that they could carry on if they wanted to, not that they'd have to. So it's all kind of wrapped together personally and as an expression of the business.
Yeah. Well, I think that's powerful. You and I have had a conversation a number of times about you stepping into that space. I joke, but you finding your voice as a coach as much as a business leader. And what you're talking about is huge for a number of reasons. I mean, the concept of parent and leader they're adjacent, aren't they? If you know how to be a great parent, you know how to be a great leader. If you know how to be a great leader, you should know how to be a great parent. The way in which you show up is very similar. The context, the context and the environment that you create is very similar. And the second thing I think is vital, and maybe this is a much longer conversation, but a lot of the ills that we've got in our society is because we are increasingly a fatherless generation. We haven't really taught fathering well, and we've got so much brokenness in our family world as well as in our rites of passage that we need to have those conversations. And you're creating not just the intellectual space for it, but also the experiential space for it. So, way to go. Here's my final question. I ask this question always, whatever we're talking about. It's the fifth of my questions. It's beyond the true, brave, kind, and curious. It's the soul question. The soul question is predicated on the understanding that life is more than five senses. In my estimation, it's more than what you see, touch, feel, etc., etc. There's something more. There's something deeper. And so where does all this stuff come from for you? What's the core belief and core motivator or core driver for the pair of you in building your businesses, in developing your family, in doing your life?
Yeah, I think for us, it goes back to a spiritual foundation of really believing that, God created humanity as a reflection of himself with kindness and beauty and creativity and the ability to create beauty and to love and all those things. So we're just always trying to get back to the purity of that people would know that they are made with intention, that they're meant to experience joy, that they're worthy, that they have a purpose, that their life has meaning. And so it's very simple for us. I wouldn't say it's like a intense, like religious framework. It's just very simple and pure, and looking at nature as a reflection of that, especially with Steve's company. When you bring people out into nature, just like the beauty and the vastness and the space that's there, and just that realizing that we really want people to realize that, and just a very simple, practical level, their worth, whether they are on a spiritual journey and seeing life through a spiritual framework or not. But I think that that's what guides us, and that's the lens that we're looking through, and just how we live our life, how we parent, really centering it around kindness and character, and who are you becoming versus how much you have or what you look like, and just all the worldly things, that there is just a deeper level of things going on in the world, and trying to connect our kids to that more than everything that's going on externally.
Love that, guys. Thank you for being honest and open, transparent. Thank you for doing what you do, because it matters in the world. It matters that people have space to experiment and find themselves in creation. It matters that people have positive images being given to them, and positive messages, and a space to be real. And it matters that you're creating the stuff that you're creating. So I'm grateful, and we're grateful for this conversation. So thank you so much, my friends.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been watching The Arable Leader with Karl Martin. Subscribe for more episodes with great leaders. And you can also listen to The Arable Leader wherever you get your podcasts. For more resources for leading in a healthy way, visit arableco.com and check out Karl's new book, The Cave, the Road, the Table, and the Fire.